Hey guys, DCHL Devin here, and welcome to another how to play and how to buy for the Army of Thror. Now, this army I was actually really hesitant to do at first because we're about to see them updated in October of this year, at least at the time of making this video. So I wasn't originally even going to cover these guys, but it has been highly requested. And, you know, some people have events before the time of Articon when they are released. So I figure, okay, why not go ahead and get right into them, and let's talk about the cousins of Durin's Folk. So when we talk about this army, let's go ahead and get into the pros first. First off, you have the solid heroes. You have some of the most strong and most hard-hitting dwarves of any dwarven faction so far. Remember, I'm not including, of course, the Iron Hills, whom are not invented at this time. So when we're talking about this, first we have to mention Thorin's Company. Thorin's Company has three heroes, Thorin, Dwalin, and Balin, who are all able to lead airborne dwarves as far as these Army of Thror dwarves. So that's a big factor. I'm going to include them in this list as if they are just simply the normal heroes and not necessarily heroes of the Army of Thorin's Company. So anyway, basically, when we're talking about Dwalin, you have an extremely hard-hitting guy who can also be mounted. You also have Thorin, who can be mounted. These are probably your first picks when picking this army, mostly because they hit harder than any other dwarf you will see, simply because of their ability to have a mount. Even when not mounted, Dwalin is a Strength 5 burly monster, and Thorin is no slouch as well. Even if we get off of those heroes, you actually have some of the most fantastic leadership dwarves, with Thrain, who can stand fast the battlefield wide, and then you have Thror, who is fearless, and therefore can automatically pass his courage test. Especially this means for stand fasting and such. Then you even have Balin, who can re-roll your priority rolls. A nice little gimmick, plus he can be mounted, making him a subpar action hero, I guess you can say, but mostly he's meant for his leadership capability. These dwarves are great leaders. Although Thror and Thrain can be seen as a bit overpriced, they are still excellent choices when picking this army. After that, another pro we should mention is the high defense troops and heroes. This actually makes you really difficult to get a general kill or a breaking kill. This is actually fantastic, as that means that your army can just focus on the main objective, and if you even accomplish your general kill or breaking kills in the scenarios, then that gives you a massive leg up, because it's so difficult to return the favor. So all those high defense troops, we're talking about defense 7. For most armies, including even heroes, that means your generic warriors will require a 6 to even wound. Your heroes are all generally defense 8, defense 9 models that have 3 points of fate each, except for Thror, whom has the Arkenstone, which allows him to basically have 3 points of fate anyway. So these guys are just really, really tough to kill. This is something you should really take advantage of. This, of course, doesn't apply really toward Dwalin as much, or the Grimhammers, whom have defense 6, but being that they are the lowest defense unit in your entire army, this is actually pretty good. So next you have spears. This is huge for a dwarven army. No other dwarven army right now has any spears, and generally the big thing you have to do is shield over and over again to hold the line as the heroes break through. But this isn't the case for the Army of Thror. In fact, your normal infantry line can actually hit pretty hard. If you use axes for piercing strike plus your spears, and then spears support your generals to give them extra attacks even as well to win fights, you're talking about a much more aggressive dwarven line than your Durin's Folk counterparts. This is actually pretty cool. Like, this is something that really should have been in the Durin's Folk. It's actually kind of unfortunate they didn't. It seems like they will be there for the Iron Hills dwarf, so this army will not be the only one with spears in the near future, but this is something you should definitely know. Also, axes. As far as the when I'm talking about axes, I'm saying the throwing axes is kind of a bit of an anti-cavalry element that you have for the Grimhammers. So the Grimhammers can move 5 inches and then throw 6 inches. Of course, even further if you do a heroic march. What this means is that if you have a cavalry army that's sort of hit and run on you because of your slow speed for the dwarves, well, then that means you can actually throw a whole flurry of throwing axes at their generals, at their captain models, or their most important models who are also mounted. This allows it where you can potentially dismount them and get them to stop running around on you. So this is kind of an anti-cavalry element, plus the fact that you already only hit on 4s, and when you move you're hitting on 5-ups, means that when blinding light goes off, you really don't care too much because you already weren't hitting very well anyway with these throwing axes. So that's just kind of a little unique thing you can do with your Grimhammers to slow down an enemy cavalry model. So let's go ahead and get into the cons of this army. First off, they are fairly overpriced for their points. Thror and Thrain should not be 140 points. In fact, the GBHL on the SPG magazine seemed to make their own assessment on this and even lowered their points to 110 and 125. So it seems like Games Workshop really didn't point these guys too well. They're just a little overpriced. Dwalin and Thorin are clearly better picks when starting out. So, of course, once again, always recommend picking them first. Now, also, this goes into your units as well. Your units, let's say your airborne warriors are kind of regularly priced. They just have less options, being that they don't have two-handed weapon options, unlike their Durance folk counterparts. But the Grimhammers, when compared to Khazad Guard, are severely overpriced. And so I guess they rate those pickaxes that they have pretty highly. Most players don't, as Bash is highly situational. But, I mean, the problem with looking at these comparisons is when you look at Iron Guard, let's say. Iron Guard is considered a pretty decent unit amongst most Dwarven players. But when compared to Berserkers from Isengard, they actually are pretty rubbish. Berserkers from Isengard are just much better in their stats than Iron Guard are, but yet no one rates Iron Guard poorly. So we should look at this the same for Grimhammers. Although they could be technically maybe a point overcosted, they're still actually pretty good for what they do in this army. So I would try to avoid too many comparisons. So with that, we can talk about Thror and Thrain being maybe about 15 points overpriced, but still fairly competitive models. Next, you have low mobility. Of course, your dwarves. I shouldn't have to mention that too much, but yeah, you all move 5 inches. Of course, Thorin and Thrain. Thorin and Dwalin are obvious exceptions there. Next, you have Dale, which is useless as an addition in this army. I would have even liked to say, I really try to look for something, guys, but I mean, here's the thing. They have Fight 4, which all your dwarves already have. They have Spears, which normally I would have celebrated, but once again, your dwarves already have it, and they have Courage 4, which is nothing special for the dwarves. So really, if you pick Dale and put them in this army, it's really because you want a slightly less costed model. They're only 1 point less, so they're not really doing too much for you, but hey, there you go. Dale is there. Other than that, though, I wouldn't say there's too many cons other than the fact that you really don't have much to choose from. This army has literally 3 choice options, and I just said one of them is absolutely useless. And then the second one is kind of overpriced. So, and given the fact that he's a little weaker in defense, he's slightly less attractive option. So a lot of times when making an army for this faction, you're generally just going to hoard out on the Defense 7 Airborne Dwarves. Next, guys, I'm going to go into the how to play this army. This army is a lot more aggressive than their cousins with their spears, because obviously this means they can strike rather than shield. As mentioned before, you usually with Durin's folk would want to shield quite a bit in order to hold the line as your heroes sort of break through and cause havoc. In this, your entire army can press forward, and because your Grimhammers play a lot more aggressively in the sense of their throwing axes and chasing down cavalry models, they kind of play a more aggressive part as well, which is kind of functions at how to play. How to play, basically, I would still have a slight mixture, maybe 1 warband of Grimhammers, personally just for the throwing axes and the ability to be a little more aggressive. Now, let's say you don't want to do the throwing axes option, then just simply pick dwarves with bows. You should absolutely have a ranged force in this army, in my opinion. The reason why is because enemy armies that are faster than you have no reason to engage you if you do not apply a ranged threat. You really, really need one. If you don't have anything, then what is to stop Rohan from just walking around and shooting you? You will have the most boring game ever, but it is unfortunately a smart tactic on the opponent's choice. So you obviously can't chase them, so you got to bring them there somehow. So I would absolutely recommend bringing bows into your Army of Thror list, or bringing in Grimhammers to sort of bring in some sort of range threat against mobility. Your heroes are far more aggressive. Obviously, you should pick Dwalin and Thorin, mount them up, and deliver absolute chaos into the ranks. Use them as your hard hitters. So I probably would hold them off on maybe flanks or punching through the middle, and trying to just absolutely fold on your enemies using heroic combats and such. Then as far as your general, I would always usually pick Thrain or Thror, mostly because of their survivability and denying the general kill. Now, if you're asking me which one I would rather pick over Thror or Thrain, this is actually a tough choice. Thror technically only has 1 point of fate, but with a 3-up save and a 4-up it's free, most likely you should consider he really has 2 points of fate, unless you fail that very first one, which would highly be unfortunate. If his shield actually gave him an extra defense, I would say Thror would be a clear winner, but it doesn't. Still, though, I'm going to go ahead and go with Thror just because of that. I know for some of you out there, you're like, but what about the battlefield-wide standfast? Well, with an army of Courage 4 and potentially Courage 5, if you give it a Warhorn, you really don't need it. But let's say you decide not to give it a Warhorn, then yes, I can say a serious argument being made for Thrain. Now, you might notice I'm kind of ignoring the Blood Feud ability. That's because that is a real gimmick and most likely to never be used in an actual event or tournament. But sure, you know, you can consider that a little victory bonus if you ever happen to play Azog's army. So other than that, this army isn't too complicated to play. It's just complicated to win with. Because of its severe lack of mobility and the lack of options, you're not going to see too many competitive Army of Thrors out there, but it is not to say it isn't competitive. This army just simply has only a one trick it can do over and over and over again, and you're trying to apply it to multiple games, which means that it's actually better to be an awesome player than anything else for this type of army, for a list building perspective. Now, as far as allies in this list, I mean, the most obvious choice, simply because they're in the Hobbit rulebook, is the Eagles. They offer a maneuverability, they offer flying, they offer range of potential, and they offer monster abilities. So I personally would pick Eagles if I'm going to make a list with Army of Thror, unless you just want to mass out on Defend 7 Dwarves. The only other options that I would say, obviously White Council are excellent options. Gandalf, Galadriel, adding in some even more general kills to your army, because they can make basically Thorin, Thrain, and all of them all completely immune to magic. And of course banish it at the same time. And if you're also going to consider it, you can say like Fellowship models, maybe like Legolas and such. But these are just allies you could throw in. Personally, if I want to stay themey, the most obvious ally is Durin's Folk. Ally and Durin's Folk. These two armies look like they are made to be with each other. So absolutely do that. If you cannot, for whatever reason, then Eagles are another solid pick. So let's go into the how to buy section of this video. This is going to be pretty quick, guys. You don't have many troop options. There's not much for me to select with. And with your options being a little more pricey than the Lord of the Rings options, this is going to be kind of tough. What do I mean by that? Well, your models are $35 for a pack rather than the traditional like 30 or less. So this army tends to be a bit harder to collect, slightly, not as bad as like, let's say, Mirkwood or Lake Town, but still kind of on the more pricey side. So this is going to be a pretty simple one for you. 2 packs of Airborne Dwarves. It's going to run you to $70 as of right now, the time I'm making this video. And then this one's going to be probably the big shocker. Buy the Dwalin, Balin, and Oin Champions of Erebor pack. Now this is $40, so technically $10 over your $100 price limit, but this is literally with me stretching it as far as possible. It's actually tough. Now, the reason I say don't get like captains and such is because you're only getting a single captain and you won't get it for the price. Why not, for $40, get 3 models? You'll actually get Dwalin and Balin, whom literally can lead this. Now, I understand the Champions of Erebor cannot lead this faction, but you are getting technically Dwalin and Balin. And let's be honest here, why would Dwalin and Balin go into combat unarmored anyway? So you might as well just give them an armored version and have them lead the Army of Thror, and there you go. And then Oin can be just kind of your generic Erebor captain. I believe they can have shields. Even if they can't, it's not really a big deal. Your Thror technically has a shield and isn't counted for it in his stat line. So there you go. For some reason, the Army of Thror, they don't know how to use their shields. They just have them and they just put them places. So, but yeah, this is actually how I would go about it. And that way you'll have your two hero models plus a third one for your next warband as you're starting up. Well, that's it, guys. That is it for the Army of Thror video. And let me know if you guys have any questions or if you have any comments about what I've said. Feel free to discuss in the comments section below, and I look forward to talking to you soon.